The American food that we had as an officer, we ate in our meals were served through the officers club. So we got 3 meals a day: breakfast, lunch, and dinner, and those would be termed in the military as a Class A meal, meaning that it's real hot food, just the same as you would get at home, or maybe a better term would be just the same as any food that you would buy in a restaurant.
It was not gourmet food, but I'll say it was wholesome and tasty, and for the most part, you got plenty of it. I gained weight while I was in the Army. Of course, the country was not that affluent at the time I went in anyhow, because hadn't been that long since the country came out of a depression in the Second World War, and things were recovering, but you know, it was still some fairly tough times. And but I have no complaints with the Army food. I ate well, and as I say, I gained weight and maybe even a muscle or two. Who knows? I came out in pretty good shape.
If we were back in the reserve, the food was good, just like home-cooked food. Otherwise, it was sea rations. And they were stored on Iwo Jima, Guadalcanal, rather. They were stored on Guadalcanal in the Second World War, and that's what we ate. That's what we had. They were there for about 7 years.
Wasn't bad. Every Sunday we had sea rations and cold cuts. Now the sea rations were from World War II. This is 1959, and I'm eating stuff from 1944, and it was still good.
What was the food like?
Well, the food wasn't too bad in the mess hall. Our mess hall was a big Quonset hut. It was probably one of the few Quonset huts at the time. Other than that, we lived in tents and so on. The meals themselves weren't too bad. What you would do, you would have your mess gear, and you'd get online. You could eat as much as you want. You could go back as many times as you want. There wasn't much of a selection in any of the meals, but the food wasn't too bad. Where we ran into the problems with the food is when we were on the maneuvers and our training sessions. Then you weren't anywhere near the mess hall, so we had what they call C rations and K rations, most of which were left over from World War II. So some of them were pretty old and beat up. A lot of it was canned goods. I can remember baked beans and beef stew and things like that. A lot of cocoa and things. So that food wasn't too good. But in the mess hall itself, wasn't too bad.
What was the food like?
The food stateside was fantastic because I played football, baseball, wrestled, and so forth. You got training table chow, but over in Korea, all you got were your C and K rations. They were froze most of the time, except in the summertime. Once in a while, if you got into division reserve or regimental reserve, then you got to go to a mess tent. You could use your mess gear. So that wasn't too bad, that food.
What was the food like?
Army grits and Army gravy. Gee, I wish I'd joined the Navy. It was all right. It was good. I can't really complain.
My favorite was beans and hot dogs cut up. And you only had two choices. The other one was rice and something else, and we all used to exchange food because somebody didn't like this, somebody didn't like that, but we always had coffee and cocoa. We always made hot coffee and cocoa.
Not bad. I was with the 8th Army headquarters in Busan, and near the end, and we had a big tent, and everybody ate there, and it was pretty good, as per expected, you know.
Extremely cold, with a 50-mile-an-hour wind, 50 below zero. In the summer, it got about a little over 100 because it's a peninsula and it's near the water on both sides, so you get that humidity. So it's very hot and humid.
The weather was similar to this, except a little colder in the winter.
The weather-wise was there. The winters, the coldest it would get would be about 20 degrees. And then during the summers, we would you'd hit on a basically high 70s to high 80s, and occasionally there would be some periods where we would hit 90s and maybe exceed 100. But the other problem is that it was also very humid up there and where we were located.
They say cold, very, very cold, but being an inside job, and it wasn't too bad. If you wanted to go out, then you froze. If you didn't want to go out, you kept warm. We had, pretty good heat in the billets. It wasn't too bad.
Well, in the summertime, it was pretty warm. As a matter of fact, the weather wasn't that much different than it is in this area of the country. We were on the 38th, we were about the 37th parallel, where I was stationed at. And if you look at any map at latitude, Washington, D.C. is on the 38th parallel, or thereabout. So the weather was comparable to what we had here. The winters were a little bit harsher, and the summers were, again, like it was here. The country was very, very hilly, and that affected the weather. But basically, it was the same type of temperatures that we have here in New Jersey.
Well, the weather had two extremes. In the summertime, extremely warm. In fact, if you follow the Olympics, normally the Olympics are in July and August. When Korea hosted them a few years back, they actually had it in September, because July and August the temperatures would have no problem getting to 110, 120 degrees. And then in the wintertime, it was just the opposite, especially up north where we were. As I said, we were at the 38th parallel, so we were as close to North Korea as you could get. We had tremendous snowstorms, and temperatures would be no problem getting down to 20 to 30 degrees below zero. So the weather was one extreme to the other, and quite difficult at times.
In the winter, it was extremely cold. Each season were the extremes, because the 38th parallel comes right through New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Ohio, 38th parallel, but because of the altitude. So you got extremes in all the weather. The dusty weather in the fall was just dusty, and in the spring it was just extremely wet rains, and the winter was extremely cold.
The winters were harsh, but as I said, I was born and raised in Minnesota, so I had plenty of cold weather training before I got to Korea. I actually thought I'd never got above the 38th parallel, where some of them troops in the war had to get up near the Chinese border, and they had terrible conditions. But I actually thought the winters were not quite as mild, were a little milder where I was than they were in Minnesota, so that was not too bad. It had their rainy season in the summer also that kept things pretty damp for a while, but they had a full range of temperature range over the course of a year for their temperatures, from very hot to quite cold and snowy.